Hello, I'm Christina Stewart with Praxis Recruitment. Today I want to talk to employers about bias. Yeah, we all have bias. As they say, if you have a brain, you have bias. And so those of us that interview people for a living or as part of our work certainly have brains, and therefore we certainly have bias. So today I want to talk about a couple specific ones, and then we're going to talk about some ways to combat it, because really, ideally, the best interviews, the best candidates are ones that can come through the process without our bias, our opinions as interviewers, shading or highlighting in some way the candidate, and we just let them come through as they are, as opposed to through the lens of our own perceptions, right? So today I want to talk about halo and horns. They're the same but opposite. Halo effect being, favorable traits, and horns effect being unfavorable traits. So the halo effect is when we take something about the person that we really like, some sort of quality that we deem to be really favorable, and then we extrapolate that out, and we have that, not necessarily cloud, that's the wrong word, but we have that judge the rest of those traits in a favorable way, right? So somebody might have a fine resume, but it might be a bit sort of mediocre, middle of the road. But let's say they went to Queen's University, right? So they had this wonderful experience at Queen's University, which we know is, it's tough to get into. It's quite an academic school. And so what we do then is we see, oh, well, that's Queen's. Wow, that's fantastic. And then we press that out to the rest of their experience. Even though the experience itself might be a bit kind of middle of the road or fine, we actually highlight that as more favorable because they went to Queen's, and because we feel that Queen's is something prestigious, something really favorable, right? Now, the opposite of that would be horns. That's the horns effect. And so that's where we take a quality or a trait that, or a skill or experience that we deem to be unfavorable, and then we extrapolate that out to the rest of the resume. So someone might have a fine resume, it might be just fine, but let's say they went to, I don't want to say a name of a school specifically, but let's say they went to a school that we didn't like. That's a huge bias, by the way, is these perceptions where, whether that's a high school that's in a particular neighborhood that we know about, and we think automatically, oh, that person must have grown up, in this particular area. And our brains do it without us even thinking. But this is where we have to take control. And we have to get ahead of this and realize the decisions that we're making based on these shortcuts that our brain takes to try to categorize people, right? So somebody might have gone to a school that you deem to be unfavorable, and it may be happening behind the scenes where you don't even know it. Same with Queens, it might be the same thing, where you're not even realizing that you're doing it. But then what you do is you take that in the horns effect and you extrapolate that out to everything, where somebody might have a fine resume, but you start to kind of shave off the edges and sort of knock them down, where the rest of their skills, experience, qualities, traits become less so. They are shaded by this one bias that we have. And so how do we get around that? Well, it's by listening to things like this and learning about biases, understanding that we all have them. Don't beat yourself up for it. What you need to do, though, is you need to take action. And so there's a few ways to go around this. A main way in terms of interviewing and categorizing people is to use some sort of grid, some sort of weighted matrix assessment system in your hiring, where you're actually grading each component that actually matters. So, do they have the education that the job description calls for? Yes or no? Well, that's a 5 or a 0, right? Like, it's just really kind of simple. So you're not necessarily weighting Queens heavier. Then you go on to their experience. Do they have industry experience that is relevant? Yes or no, right? And so you're just sort of categorizing the experience as opposed to just using your gut feel on what candidates look like. So there's that way, certainly in assessing resumes and going through interview processes, to use something that's really that has a bit more rigor to it. That definitely does eliminate bias or mitigate mitigate. I'm not going to say eliminate because that's tough to do, but it does definitely reduce it. Another way to reduce biases is to use an interview guide. So you're asking everyone exactly the same questions, right? You ask them, what's your leadership style? What's your leadership style? What's your leadership style? And so you're going through an interview guide. And so that way you're asking the exact same questions and giving everyone the same fair shake. And then another way, a really, really powerful way to actually eliminate your own bias or minimize your own bias is to have somebody else in on the interview, right? And so if there's two of you, you probably have different bias, and then that way you can come together and maybe reduce the ones by having someone who doesn't have that same one. All right, makes sense? Good. So I am going to do, and am doing a series on biases. So this one's been the halo effect and the horn effect. So check back to our YouTube channel and you're going to find more videos on how to eliminate biases in the recruitment process. Thank you so much for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of them. Thanks. Take care.